Are you eating vegetables every single day and still worried about your heart? Maybe you've heard someone say, after 60, don't eat certain vegetables. They cause blood clots. That's a frightening claim. And when you're over 60, your health feels more fragile. You're thinking about stroke risk, heart attack, circulation, longevity. You don't want to make a mistake with your food. But here's what's really going on inside your body. Vegetables do not cause blood clots in healthy individuals. In fact, most vegetables are among the most protective foods for your blood vessels. So why does this myth exist? It comes from a misunderstanding of how blood clotting works and how vitamin K interacts with certain medications. And when that nuance gets lost, people begin fearing the very foods that actually protect them. And that's dangerous because after 60, your risk of clot formation doesn't rise because of broccoli or spinach. It rises because of chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, elevated blood sugar, damaged endothelial lining, sedentary lifestyle, visceral fat around the organs. Blood clots form when your vascular system is inflamed and unstable, not because you ate kale. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Think of your bloodstream like a highway. Platelets are the emergency repair crew. If the road is smooth, they stay inactive. But if the road is cracked and damaged, meaning your arteries are inflamed, the repair crew jumps into action. That's clot formation. The problem is not the repair crew, the problem is the damaged road. And what damages that road? High insulin, high glucose, oxidative stress, poor sleep, chronic stress hormones like cortisol, lack of movement. That's the real story. In today's talk, I'm going to break this down clearly and scientifically. We'll explore what actually triggers clot formation after 60. Under why certain vegetables are misunderstood, the metabolic root causes behind clot risk, and the practical daily protocol that protects your blood vessels naturally. Because if you're serious about aging well, with sharp cognition, strong circulation, and stable energy, you need clarity, not fear. And by the end of this talk, you'll understand exactly what to eat, what to avoid, and what truly protects your cardiovascular system long term. Let's begin with the real reason clots become more common as we age and why vegetables aren't the culprit. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Most people imagine a blood clot as something that just happens out of nowhere. But from a physiological perspective, a clot is not a random event. It's a response to damage in the circulatory system. If the internal lining of your vessels, the endothelium, is healthy, clotting only occurs when needed, like to stop bleeding after a cut. But as we age, especially after age 60, that delicate balance begins to shift. The combined effects of oxidative stress, chronic low-grade inflammation, insulin resistance, and visceral fat accumulation all push your vascular system into a state where clot formation becomes more likely, not because of any one food, but because the terrain inside your blood vessels changes. To visualize this, let me explain it with a simple analogy. Imagine your bloodstream is a river, and your blood vessels are the riverbanks. When those banks are smooth and reinforced, water flows freely and stays in its channel. A clot is like a dam that only forms where it's needed to stop a breach. But when the banks are eroded from years of inflammatory stress, debris, cracks, and weak spots develop. Your repair system, platelets and clotting proteins, gets activated even without a real injury, simply because the riverbanks look damaged. In other words, the body responds to perceived damage, and age-related metabolic dysfunction makes that perception more frequent. So why does clot risk increase after 60? Let's break it down. Chronic low-grade inflammation increases with age. Research shows age-related cellular senescence releases inflammatory proteins that increase clotting activity. Inflammation sensitizes your vascular repair system, lowering the threshold for clot formation. Oxidative stress changes fibrin and clot structure. As we get older, oxidative damage alters fibrin networks, creating denser clots that resist breakdown, fibrinolysis. That means clots form faster and are harder to dissolve, even when they aren't needed. Metabolic dysfunction drives prothrombotic changes, Conditions like insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome don't just increase blood sugar, they change how clotting factors and platelets behave. Elevated insulin and inflammatory signaling make the endothelium more sticky and platelets more prone to clump. Visceral fat and excess body weight fuel a procoagulant state. Fat tissue, especially around the abdomen, secretes inflammatory cytokines that further encourage clotting pathways. Let's be clear, none of this has anything to do with eating vegetables. Vegetables, especially leafy greens, are high in fiber, antioxidants, and phytonutrients that reduce oxidative stress and inflammation, the very factors that promote clot formation. They also support liver function, and a well-functioning liver is essential to balancing clotting and anti-clotting proteins. So where did this myth come from? It often springs from a misunderstanding of vitamin K, a nutrient abundant in greens like spinach, kale, broccoli, and its role in the clotting cascade. Vitamin K is necessary for activating clotting proteins, but in medically controlled situations, especially when someone is on specific anticoagulant medication, sudden large shifts in vitamin K intake can affect medication levels. In a healthy, medication-free individual, vitamin K doesn't cause clots. It helps regulate normal clotting balance. Now let's talk about what does cause clots and how you can reverse those risk pathways naturally. First, we'll explore how insulin resistance, a core metabolic issue for many over 60, directly alters vascular health and clotting behavior. Now let's talk about one of the most overlooked drivers of clot risk after 60, insulin resistance. This is where the real story begins. Here's what's really going on inside your body. When you eat refined carbohydrates or constantly snack throughout the day, your blood sugar rises. Your pancreas releases insulin to move that glucose into cells. That's normal, but over time, especially with age, reduced muscle mass, and less activity, your cells stop responding efficiently to insulin. That's insulin resistance. Now here's the part most people don't realize. Insulin resistance doesn't just affect blood sugar, it changes the behavior of your blood vessels. What the research shows is that elevated insulin levels increase inflammatory signaling inside the endothelium, the inner lining of your arteries. It reduces nitric oxide production, which is the molecule that keeps vessels relaxed and flexible, and it increases expression of clotting factors like fibrinogen and PAI1, a protein that blocks clot breakdown. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Think of insulin resistance like a thermostat that's stuck on high. Instead of insulin turning off after a meal, it stays elevated all day. That constant hormonal pressure irritates your vascular lining. The surface becomes rough instead of smooth, and rough surfaces invite platelets to stick. That's how metabolic dysfunction sets the stage for unnecessary clot formation. This is why individuals with metabolic syndrome, high triglycerides, abdominal fat, elevated fasting glucose, have higher rates of stroke and thrombosis, not because of vegetables, because of metabolic instability. Now here's the empowering part. This process is reversible. You don't fix clot risk by removing spinach. You fix it by restoring metabolic flexibility. Here's a simple vascular protection protocol you can begin using. First, control insulin spikes. Eat within a defined 8-10 hour window daily. Avoid constant grazing. Prioritize protein at your first meal, 30-40 grams. Pair carbohydrates with fiber and fat to slow glucose rise. Second, preserve muscle mass. After 60, muscle becomes your glucose disposal organ. Resistance training 3 times per week improves insulin sensitivity dramatically. Even body weight movements, squats, wall push-ups, resistance bands stimulate glucose uptake independent of insulin. Third, reduce visceral fat. Waist circumference is more predictive of clot risk than LDL cholesterol alone. A gradual 5 to 10% body fat reduction significantly lowers inflammatory cytokines and pro-thrombotic markers. Fourth, improve nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide keeps vessels smooth and anti-stick. Daily walking after meals, even 10 minutes, improves endothelial function. Beetroot, arugula, and leafy greens naturally support nitric oxide pathways. Notice something important. The vegetables people fear are actually supporting the exact mechanisms that prevent clots. This is why context matters. If this is helpful so far, consider subscribing. I post content like this every day to help you optimize your health from the inside out. Now, there's one more critical layer we need to understand, because beyond insulin, there's another silent driver of clot risk after 60, and it involves stress hormones, sleep, and liver function. And this is where things get even more interesting. Now let's talk about another silent driver of clot formation after 60, chronic stress physiology and liver congestion. Because clot risk is not just about sugar, it's about hormonal balance. Here's what's really going on inside your body. As we age, cortisol patterns often become dysregulated. Instead of rising in the morning and falling at night, cortisol stays elevated longer. Poor sleep, emotional stress, chronic worry, and even overtraining can keep stress hormones high. And elevated cortisol does something very important inside your bloodstream. It increases clotting potential. What the research shows is that chronic stress elevates fibrinogen levels, one of the key clotting proteins. It also increases platelet reactivity and raises inflammatory cytokines like IL-6, which amplify clot formation signals. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Think of cortisol like an alarm system. In short bursts, it's protective. It helps you survive danger, but when the alarm never turns off, your body shifts into a defensive state. Blood becomes slightly thicker. Repair systems become more reactive. Platelets become more sensitive. It's a survival adaptation. But in modern life, the threat is often psychological. Deadlines, financial stress, poor sleep, and the body doesn't know the difference. Now let's layer in another piece, the liver. Your liver produces most clotting factors and also the proteins that regulate clot breakdown. If the liver is metabolically stressed, from fatty liver, excess sugar, alcohol, or chronic inflammation, it alters the balance between pro-clotting and anti-clotting proteins. After 60, fatty liver becomes extremely common, even in people who are not overweight. Why? Because of decades of insulin resistance, refined carbohydrate intake, and sedentary behavior. A congested liver shifts the clotting equilibrium toward risk. This is root cause physiology. So what can you do? Here is your hormonal and liver support protocol. First, stabilize cortisol rhythm. Get morning sunlight within 30 minutes of waking. Avoid screens 60 minutes before bed. Maintain consistent sleep timing. Consider magnesium glycinate at night, if medically appropriate. Second, protect deep sleep. Deep sleep is when inflammatory markers drop and vascular repair occurs. Aim for 7-8 hours. Keep the room cool and dark. Stop eating 2 to 3 hours before bed to improve nighttime insulin levels. Third, support liver function naturally. Prioritize cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Include bitter foods like arugula or dandelion greens. Limit alcohol, even moderate intake raises fibrinogen levels. Maintain adequate protein intake for liver detox pathways. Notice the pattern again. The vegetables people are told to avoid are the very ones that enhance liver detoxification and reduce inflammation. They help regulate clotting balance. They do not cause clots. If this is making sense so far and you appreciate this root cause approach, consider subscribing. This channel is about empowerment, not fear. Now there's one final and powerful piece we need to address. Because even if you control insulin and stress, there is one lifestyle factor that dramatically changes clot risk within hours. And most people over 60 underestimate it. There is one factor that can change clot risk within hours, not weeks, not months, hours. And that factor is movement. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Your circulatory system is not designed for stillness. Blood is meant to flow, muscles are meant to contract. Veins rely on movement to push blood back toward the heart. When you sit for long periods, especially after 60, circulation slows, blood pools in the lower extremities, and clot risk increases. This is why long flights, extended bed rest, and prolonged sitting are well-documented triggers for deep vein thrombosis. Let me explain this with a simple analogy. Imagine your bloodstream as a river. When water flows continuously, it stays oxygenated and clean. But when water becomes stagnant, sediment settles, debris accumulates, and pressure builds. Your blood behaves the same way. Muscle contractions act like pumps. Every time you walk, your calf muscles squeeze veins and push blood upward. This prevents pooling and reduces clot formation risk. Now layer that with age. After 60, muscle mass naturally declines, a process called sarcopenia. Less muscle means less pumping action. Combine that with more sitting, and you have slower venous return. And slower flow increases clot probability. But here's the empowering part. The solution is simple. You don't need extreme workouts. You need consistent circulation. Here is your daily anti-clot movement protocol. First, walk after meals. Just 10-15 minutes of walking after eating improves glucose control and enhances endothelial function. It also reduces post-meal insulin spikes, which we already discussed as pro-inflammatory. Second, break up sitting every 30-45 minutes. Stand, stretch, do 20 calf raises. This alone significantly improves venous return. Third, resistance train 2 to 3 times per week. Focus on legs, squats, step-ups, resistance bands. Stronger legs mean better circulation. Fourth, hydration matters. Mild dehydration thickens blood viscosity. Aim for steady hydration throughout the day, especially if you're active or in warm climates. Fifth, omega-3 fatty acids. Fatty fish like salmon or sardines support healthy platelet balance and reduce inflammatory signaling. This supports vascular stability. Now let's pause and connect the dots. Clots form when 3 things converge: damaged vessel lining, sluggish blood flow, hyperreactive clotting factors. This is known in medicine as Virchow's triad. Notice what's missing: vegetables. The true drivers are metabolic dysfunction, stress physiology, and immobility. And the solution is metabolic stability, sleep regulation, liver support, and daily movement. If this content is helping you see your health more clearly, consider subscribing. My goal is to help you think like a functional medicine clinician, not react to headlines. Now let's bring everything together and talk about what this means for your long-term health, energy, cognition, and longevity. So let's step back and simplify everything we've covered today. The idea that vegetables cause blood clots after 60 is not supported by physiology. Here's what's really going on inside your body. Blood clots form when the internal environment becomes unstable, when the endothelial lining is inflamed, when insulin remains chronically elevated, when visceral fat secretes inflammatory cytokines, when cortisol stays high and sleep is poor, when circulation slows due to inactivity. That's the terrain that promotes clot formation, not broccoli, not spinach, not leafy greens. In fact, the very vegetables some people fear are rich in fiber, antioxidants, nitrates, and phytonutrients that improve nitric oxide production, reduce oxidative stress, and support liver detoxification, all protective mechanisms against clot development. This is root cause thinking. We don't remove protective foods based on misunderstanding. We restore metabolic balance. Let's recap your practical protocol. Control insulin by avoiding constant snacking and prioritizing protein. Preserve muscle with resistance training and daily walking. Protect sleep to regulate cortisol and lower inflammation. Support liver health with cruciferous vegetables and adequate protein. Stay hydrated and break up prolonged sitting. These are simple actions, but they directly influence endothelial health, clotting balance, and vascular longevity. And here's the most empowering truth. After 60, your body is still highly adaptable. Endothelial cells regenerate. Insulin sensitivity can improve. Inflammation can decrease. Muscle can grow. Aging does not mean decline is inevitable. It means precision matters more. So here's my challenge to you. Pick just one of these changes today. Maybe it's a 10-minute walk after dinner. Maybe it's going to bed 30 minutes earlier. Maybe it's adding cruciferous vegetables instead of fearing them. And track how your body responds. Energy improves. Mental clarity sharpens. Circulation feels stronger. Health optimization is not about restriction. It's about intelligent correction. If this added value to your understanding, like the video and subscribe to join others who are optimizing their metabolic health naturally, without fear, without extremes, and without unnecessary medication. Your body is not fragile, it is responsive. And when you work with physiology instead of fighting it, longevity becomes a strategy, not a gamble. I'll see you in the next one.